This adventurous story begins with a queen of the Debo Empire, who was incredibly beautiful. The Debo Empire was located in a place completely surrounded by snow. The queen of Debo, named Deber, was pregnant and wished to give birth to a wonderful child. One day, as the queen stepped out of her palace, she saw a rose standing alone amidst the snow. As she reached out to touch the rose, a thorn pricked her finger, causing a few drops of her blood to fall on the snow. Seeing this, the queen felt immense joy and made a wish that her daughter would be as beautiful as she was and as brave as the lone rose. Soon after, the queen gave birth to a stunningly beautiful daughter, just as she had wished. She lovingly named her Snow White. However, shortly after the birth, the queen fell seriously ill and passed away. With the queen gone, Snow White was left all alone. Even her father, the king, struggled to rule the kingdom properly. At that time, a dark army launched an attack on the kingdom. Snow White's father, the king, led his soldiers into battle and discovered that the dark army was made of stone, as if they had been created using black magic. Despite the formidable enemy, the king and his soldiers emerged victorious, completely destroying the dark army. After the battle, the king's soldiers captured a woman named Ravenna. When the king saw her, he was instantly captivated by her beauty. Ravenna was stunningly beautiful, and so, the king brought her to his palace and married her. As the king tried to get closer to Ravenna, she simply said, "Once before, a king took me in, but he kept me only as long as I remained young. People like us have no real importance." Taking advantage of the situation, Ravenna seized a knife and stabbed the king to death. With the king gone, the kingdom was left vulnerable. Ravenna immediately summoned her dark army, and it was revealed that she was, in fact, the queen of the dark army. Everything became clear. Killing the king and seizing the kingdom had been Ravenna's plan all along. Slowly, she took control of the entire kingdom. At that time, Snow White was still young. Witnessing the terror around her, she tried to escape with her friend William and his father. But unfortunately, many of Ravenna's soldiers captured Snow White and imprisoned her. She was always kept in the back palace. Slowly, Ravenna's dark army took control of the entire kingdom, and she turned all the king's soldiers to her side. Ravenna possessed immense powers of black magic, which she used to rule the kingdom. Even after so many years, she hadn't aged at all. This was because she maintained her youth by absorbing the beauty of young girls. Because of this, Ravenna remained extraordinarily beautiful. Ravenna had a magical mirror that always spoke the truth. One day, she stood before the mirror and asked, "Who is the most beautiful?" The golden mirror replied, "Until now, you were the most beautiful, but now Snow White has become the most beautiful girl in the world." The mirror also foretold Ravenna's future. It warned her that Snow White would one day be the cause of her death. However, if Ravenna managed to obtain Snow White's heart by any means, she would survive and remain the most beautiful woman forever. Ravenna was utterly shocked. But now, she knew what needed to be done. She immediately summoned her brother and ordered him to bring her Snow White's heart. Ravenna's brother went straight to Snow White's palace, where she was shown how incredibly beautiful she had become. Snow White quickly realized that the soldiers had come to kill her. Thinking fast, she tricked Ravenna's brother, fought off the soldiers, and escaped. The soldiers immediately chased after her. Under no circumstances could they let Snow White get away. As she fled, Snow White entered a dark forest. This forest was extremely dangerous, inhabited by magical creatures and fearsome devils who could devour humans alive. However, Ravenna's dark army could not enter the forest because their magic did not work there. Left with no choice, the soldiers turned back. Alone and afraid, Snow White wandered deeper into the dark forest, unaware of how much danger she was in. She soon became lost, unable to figure out which direction to go. Suddenly, she found herself surrounded by mysterious creatures. Snow White fainted right there. When Ravenna learned that Snow White had escaped into the dark forest, she ordered that she be captured at any cost. However, Ravenna knew that her powers would not work inside the dark forest. So, she told her brother, "We need to find someone who has been inside the dark forest before." Ravenna then summoned a brave warrior from her kingdom named Eric, who had previously ventured into the dark forest and survived. She explained the entire situation to him and commanded him to capture Snow White and bring her back. But Eric refused to go. He knew how deadly the dark forest was. Escaping alive from there was nearly impossible. However, Ravenna had black magic, and she used it to uncover Eric's past. Eric's wife had died a long time ago, and Ravenna used his emotions against him. She made him an offer. "If you bring me Snow White, I will bring your dead wife back to life." Eric was utterly helpless. He desperately wanted his wife back, so he reluctantly agreed. Without wasting any time, Eric, Ravenna's brother, and a group of soldiers set out for the dark forest. The forest was filled with darkness and magical creatures. But Eric had been there before, so he knew the paths well. After traveling for some time, he finally found Snow White. He captured her and started taking her back with him, because all he wanted was to bring his wife back to life. But Snow White pleaded with him, "Please, don't hand me over to them. They will take my heart and kill me. Ravenna will only grow stronger if she gets my heart." She also warned him, "Ravenna is lying to you. No matter what she promised, she will betray you in the end." Eric thought deeply about this. He turned to Ravenna's brother and said, "I will give you Snow White only after Ravenna brings my wife back to life." Ravenna's brother laughed mockingly and revealed the truth. Even with all her powers, Ravenna cannot bring back the dead. She only tricked you to get what she wanted. Realizing he had been deceived, Eric turned against Ravenna's soldiers. When they tried to take Snow White, he fought back fiercely, taking down one soldier after another. No one had expected Eric to be such a skilled warrior. Eric managed to defeat all the soldiers, but Ravenna's brother escaped to save his own life. Snow White then pleaded with Eric, "Please take me to my friend's father. I will be completely safe there." But Eric had nothing to gain from this. Sensing his hesitation, Snow White promised to reward him with many gold coins. Hearing this, Eric agreed and continued leading Snow White deeper into the dark forest. Meanwhile, on the other side, we see King Luke, who was William's father. Luke had already informed William that Snow White had escaped from the palace and was now in the dark forest, where her life was in great danger. Upon hearing this, William was shocked and immediately set out to save her. He already knew who wanted to harm Snow White and who was after her, so instead of searching aimlessly, he headed straight for Ravenna's brother and his soldiers. When William reached them, he said, "Let me join your team. I am an excellent archer." But Ravenna's brother sneered, "We already have the best archers in our team." To prove it, one of his soldiers immediately attacked William. However, William dodged the attack effortlessly, pulled out an arrow, and killed the soldier with a single shot. Everyone was stunned by his impressive archery skills. Seeing this, Ravenna's brother agreed to let William join his team. But William had his own plan. He wanted to stay close to them, gather information, and find a way to reach Snow White. Meanwhile, in the dark forest, Eric and Snow White continued venturing deeper into the dangerous woods. Eric knew that even greater threats lay ahead, and soon, his fears came true. A massive, terrifying creature appeared before them. It was so monstrous that even Eric, with all his strength, couldn't fight it off. The creature attacked Eric viciously, injuring him badly and throwing him to the ground. Just as it was about to kill him, Snow White stepped forward. Instead of showing fear, she acted as if she had no intention of harming the creature. She made it seem like she and Eric were merely passing through the dark forest. At first, the creature lunged at her too, ready to attack. But Snow White held her gaze firmly, looking at it as if she were its queen. Her trick worked. The creature backed away without harming them and disappeared into the forest. This time, Snow White had saved Eric's life. Both of them slowly got up and started moving forward. They had to escape the dark forest, or else they would keep facing such dangers. As they continued their journey, they reached the riverbank, where they encountered a group of women. These women appeared to be from a tribal community, and they immediately attacked Eric and Snow White. However, Eric quickly explained their situation, telling them that they were escaping from a queen named Ravenna. The moment the tribal women heard Ravenna's name, their expressions changed. Without hesitation, they allowed Eric and Snow White onto their boat and helped them cross the river, guiding them safely out of the dark forest. Eric felt he could trust these women, as they seemed harmless. The Hidden Tribe. After traveling for a while, Eric and Snow White arrived at a hidden tribal village, a place where only women lived. The reason for this was tragic. Ravenna had previously attacked this village, capturing all the male soldiers and forcing them into her army. Additionally, the women in the tribe had disfigured their faces on purpose. This was to prevent Ravenna from stealing their beauty and absorbing their youth, as she had done to others. Eric and Snow White felt deep sorrow for these women, who had been forced to live in constant fear of Ravenna's return. A sudden attack. During their time in the village, Eric discovered the truth. Snow White was not an ordinary girl, she was a princess. Believing that Snow White would be safe in the village, Eric decided to leave. But as soon as he reached the forest path at midnight, Ravenna's brother arrived with his soldiers. Without warning, they launched a brutal attack on the tribe. The village was set on fire, and the flames spread rapidly. From a distance, Eric saw everything, and he couldn't ignore it. He immediately rushed back to help. However, he was alone, and there were too many soldiers for him to fight. Realizing this, Eric grabbed Snow White and fled with her. To hide from the soldiers, they took cover underwater, where they remained for some time, knowing that it was the only safe place at the moment. Ravenna's weakness. Meanwhile, we see Queen Ravenna. Her condition had deteriorated severely, her entire body was shriveling, and she was aging rapidly. This was happening because her powers were fading. At this moment, Ravenna recalled a memory from her childhood. In her childhood, Ravenna's tribe was attacked by a powerful king. All the soldiers were slaughtered, including Ravenna's father. At that moment, her mother performed a ritual. She added a few drops of her own blood into a mystical liquid and made Ravenna drink it. This liquid was extremely powerful. It granted Ravenna a blessing. You will be the most beautiful of all, and beauty will be your true power. But one day, this same beauty will also be the reason for your death. And that prophecy was coming true in the present. For years, Ravenna had ruled through dark magic, but after learning that Snow White was more beautiful than her, Ravenna's powers began to weaken. Until she could kill Snow White and consume her heart, she would continue to deteriorate. There was even a chance that Ravenna could die if she didn't act soon. Meanwhile, Eric and Snow White were still escaping, carefully moving through the dense forest. They accidentally triggered a trap. Before they knew it, they were hanging from a tree, caught in a net. Within moments, a group of dwarves appeared. These dwarves were known for capturing travelers and stealing their belongings. However, after searching Eric and Snow White, the dwarves found nothing valuable. Frustrated, the dwarves decided that they should just kill them. That's when Snow White spoke up. "You should be fighting against that wicked princess? Everything that has happened is because of Ravenna." The dwarves hesitated, but then replied, "We abandoned such battles after our king, Magnum, was killed." At that moment, Snow White made a shocking revelation. "King Magnum was my father? I am his daughter." The dwarves refused to believe her at first. But one of the older dwarves carefully examined Snow White and recognized her immediately. "She is indeed from the royal family," he said. "And she is the one who will kill Ravenna." Realizing the truth, the dwarves released Eric and Snow White. The dwarves guided them through a hidden cave, a passage that led to a mystical world of fairies. This enchanted land was a safe haven, where many magical creatures and fairies had taken refuge after Ravenna took over the kingdom. Until now, no one had ever reached this place. Eric and Snow White felt relieved. As long as they stayed here, they would be safe. But danger follows. Unfortunately, their safety didn't last long. Ravenna's brother had discovered their location. With a massive army, he invaded the fairy sanctuary, launching a devastating attack. William was also part of their team, and his eyes immediately fell on Snow White. Seeing the danger, he began fighting back against the soldiers to save her life. Meanwhile, on the other side, Ravenna's brother was fighting Eric. Both were at an equal level, striking blows at each other. To weaken Eric mentally, Ravenna's brother taunted him, saying, "When I was killing your wife, she was screaming your name, but you weren't there to save her." This revelation made Eric realize that it was Ravenna's brother who had murdered his wife. Overcome with rage, Eric lifted him and threw him onto a sharp wooden stake. Severely wounded, Ravenna's brother tried to communicate with his sister through telepathy, but at that moment, Ravenna herself was too weak to help. She could only apologize to him as he took his last breaths. Meanwhile, Snow White recognized William as her childhood friend who had come to help her. William, along with the remaining soldiers, took Snow White away from the battlefield. He told her, "We must reach my father's castle as soon as possible, we'll be safe there." While traveling, they stopped for the night in the icy mountains. As childhood friends, William and Snow White reminisced about old times, sharing their memories. It seemed as if William had feelings for Snow White. At one point, William offered Snow White a beautiful apple to eat. Trusting him completely, she took a bite. But the very next moment, her body started weakening. It was later revealed that the apple was poisoned. The person Snow White thought was William was, in fact, none other than Princess Ravenna in disguise. Ravenna had taken William's form and successfully trapped Snow White in her scheme. As Snow White started dying from the poison, Ravenna smirked and said, "Once you die, I will absorb your beauty." Snow White was the only one whose existence was weakening Ravenna's powers, and now she was on the brink of death. But now, everything was about to change for the better. Just as Ravenna was about to kill Snow White and extract her heart, William and Eric arrived at the scene. They immediately attacked Ravenna to save Snow White, but she vanished before they could land a fatal blow. When William and Eric realized that Snow White was dead, they were devastated, especially William, her childhood friend, who had grown to love her. Heartbroken, he kissed Snow White, hoping for a miracle, but she did not wake up. Snow White's body was then taken to William's father's castle. Eric, overwhelmed with sorrow, sat beside her and wept. He, too, had fallen in love with Snow White, seeing in her the reflection of his deceased wife. Every moment he had spent with Snow White had felt like he was reliving his time with his beloved. Unable to bear the sight of her lifeless body, Eric finally confessed his love and kissed her. The very next moment, the curse was completely broken, and Snow White came back to life. It was their true love that shattered Ravenna's dark spell. Fully recovered, Snow White stood before her people, determined and resolute. She addressed her soldiers, inspiring them with her words, "If we stand together, we can defeat Ravenna. She is pure evil, and we must fight for our rightful kingdom." Now that everyone knew Snow White was their rightful princess and had miraculously returned, they rallied behind her, ready for battle. A strategic plan was made, and the army set out to attack Ravenna's kingdom. Eric, now filled with hope, contributed to the mission. A massive army stormed into Ravenna's kingdom, launching a surprise assault. The attack was so sudden and forceful that Ravenna's forces were completely caught off guard. The battle raged on, with soldiers fighting fiercely, and in the midst of the chaos, Snow White finally reached Ravenna herself. Ravenna had regained her beauty once again by sacrificing the lives of many young girls. Meanwhile, Snow White, fully armored, stood ready to fight her. However, it was obvious that defeating Ravenna wouldn't be easy. She possessed immense dark powers. From the very beginning, Ravenna attacked Snow White relentlessly, inflicting severe damage. At one point, Ravenna even levitated atop a massive fireball, altering her body's form as she taunted, "You are nothing compared to my dark powers." Despite the overwhelming odds, Snow White refused to back down. Ravenna, now wielding a dagger, struck at Snow White, aiming to rip her heart out. However, Snow White blocked the attack just in time. Ravenna was too focused on her assault to notice that Snow White had a second dagger in her other hand. In a swift and decisive move, Snow White plunged the blade deep into Ravenna's stomach. Weakened beyond recovery, Ravenna's dark powers began to fade. Her body withered, and within moments, she collapsed and took her final breath. With Ravenna's death, the war was won. Snow White's army had triumphed, and the kingdom was finally free from Ravenna's terror. The soldiers, in unison, declared Snow White as their new queen. She vowed to lead the kingdom with wisdom, strength, and protection. And with that, our story comes to an end.